D. Watkins.
Hey, what's happening?
What's good, man?
Great seeing you, man.
It is great seeing you, man. It is great seeing you. And listen,
I know you've been moving.
but yeah, listen, we've been moving, but so have you. And I'm telling you, man, I am so grateful for you. I am so excited for everything you are doing. I love how high you hold up the flag of Baltimore, how you hold up the flag of Maryland. And one thing I always tell things about D is we have in our state one of the most special talents in the country. Literally one of the best writers, one of the best thought leaders in the entire country, and he's ours. And he's ours.
That's you,
And
but
so, real
that's you,
proud,
but
man.
I'm here. I'm here too.
I love it, man. How you doing?
Excellent, man. I'm super thankful, man, to be able to have this conversation. I think one of the things that you've always been so great at is just taking these really big issues and transforming them into a language that allows everyone to play, right? And I think this is going to be really helpful. I think a lot of people are going to gain understanding on just the issue of cannabis and what's criminal and what's not criminal and how it affects everyday lives. So I'm happy to talk to the explainer in chief. How's it
I
coming?
love it. And I'm telling you, man, and it's wild because, and again, I have to say thank you because we could not have gotten this done without folks like you, without impacted citizens and activists, without people who are pushing us. And we came in saying we're going to have a very aggressive agenda. Right. We came in saying that we were going to make sure that we were not going to waste the moment to be able to really move the state, have the state go faster, and just be unafraid and unapologetic about the things that we want to be able to do. And when the state voted that we put, cannabis was on the ballot, and when the state voted to have a recreational cannabis market, we were just very clear that we were going to make sure that we could have the smoothest, the most equitable rollout for a legalized cannabis market in the entire country, and we did that. We had over 174 new cannabis licensees that were all social equity cannabis licensees, because this was about how can you create pathways to work and wages and wealth for all people. And you have to be able to address how the cannabis and how this war on cannabis has helped to exacerbate the wealth gap. So now this new cannabis market can actually be one of the proud ways that we have of being able to decrease and eliminate it. But we also had to be clear that you're not going to just sit there and tell me that we have a new $1 billion market in our state and then have people who still can't get barber's licenses. Like there's just something
Absolutely.
unfair about that.
So let's go back. Let's dial it back so we could just, like, for context, to bring everybody into the conversation.
Absolutely.
A whole lot of people don't understand your cannabis executive order. So
Yeah.
can you just break it down for me in layman's terms?
Absolutely. So basically, what it is, there's only a few dozen people in this country that have the ability to pardon, right? And basically, what a pardon is basically it's a removal of guilt off of a conviction. And what we did with that cannabis market was we asked the team, said, how many people are still suffering from the legal consequences of a conviction from a misdemeanor cannabis charge, right? And particularly right now where Maryland now has a legal market. And so we looked and the number ended up being that, you had well over 100,000 people who were still sitting there with a cannabis charge on their record. And which meant that they weren't able to do a lot of the basic things, get things like student loans and home loans and all this kind of stuff. Being able to open up a barbershop, being able to get a government contract because they had a misdemeanor cannabis conviction on their record for something that was no longer even illegal in the state of Maryland. And so since I am one of few people in the country that actually have pardon authority, we decided to use it. And so what I did was I signed a mass pardon, the largest mass pardon in the history of the United States. 175,000 cannabis convictions were wiped clean, literally in the stroke of a pen. And the thing that was so amazing about it was who we stood there with. We stood there with activists who then helped make it happen. Right? We stood there with impacted citizens. I remember we stood there with a guy named Shiloh, who recently had a job, was fired from the job on the second day because they couldn't pass a background check because it's something that's legal in the state now. And so the thing that was really exciting for us was this was a reason and this was an opportunity to be able to say, if you have the chance to actually have your hands on the lever of power, how are you going to use it? How are you going to exercise it? And who are you going to fight for? And when we talked about the idea of leave no one behind, this is exactly what we mean by leave no one behind, because we had so many people who were still suffering consequences from something, and basically how you made every sentence a life sentence. And so that was a first, and I think a really important step, where it wasn't just about what we did in Maryland, but the whole country has taken notice on the ability for governors to really think clearly about how can we use and leverage this power to make sure that we're righting a lot of historical wrongs.
So, it's funny because it's like, I just, we're close in age, right? And I just remember back in the day, our parents and grandparents used to say, don't smoke weed. It leads to crack. And it doesn't necessarily work like that. Has the way you
That's exactly right.
Has the way you view cannabis evolved over the past like 10, 20 years, or have you always had like the looked at it the same way, like from Jump Street?
No, it's evolved in me also, and a lot of it, frankly, happened after my time in the military, where I'd smoked before when I was coming up, but it wasn't like something that was a regular part of my life or whatever. But I remember when we came back from the military, I had a lot of my soldiers who were actually utilizing cannabis. And they were doing it for medicinal reasons. They were doing it for healing reasons. They were doing it for a whole bunch of stuff. I actually later on went back and got a medical cannabis license myself as well, as I was coming back and when I transitioned back home. And so the thing that I continue to see and understand was that we had something that was continually being used. I mean, right now, remember, you had cannabis on the same schedule, on the same federal schedule as heroin. How does that make sense?
Right.
Like, I know people, I've lost people because of heroin. I've lost friends because of heroin. I've never had anyone that I've lost because of cannabis. You know what I mean? And so our ability to be honest about what happened, what created this arc, this historical arc in the first place, why we as a country have frankly just used cannabis as a cudgel to be able to go after communities, particularly Black communities, particularly Black and brown communities, particularly for low-income communities. When you look at what's happened in the state of Maryland, that the African Americans were 3 times more likely to be convicted of a cannabis conviction than anyone else. You can't tell me that's a fair application of that law. You just can't. Right. There's no data that backs that up. And so the thing that we just continue to see when I thought about my evolution was this is actually in many ways almost less to do about cannabis. It's about fairness. It's about how we allow people to get back into a workforce, because you cannot make every sentence a life sentence, which is continually keeping people outside of a workforce. How are we thinking about this when it comes to being able to actually increase wealth and ownership opportunities for every member of society? Because if you can have a growing economy, that means you have a participatory economy. It means you have more people involved in the economy. And how can we be more honest about what the data is telling us? And there was really no reason for us to have, again, cannabis on the same classification level of a heroin, because we know the impacts of both of those 2 drugs and the impact that has had on communities.
So when you came up with this big idea, was there like a lot of internal pushback, or was most of the team like, yeah, Wes, we got to do this. We're going with the 175. We're going to make history.
No, honestly, one of the things I love about my team is that these are some hard chargers, man. Because honestly, when we first said, let's do this, it was actually members of the team and members of the impacted community who were like, you know what, but hold on. If we're going to do this, let's add on para, right? Because that's a whole other thing, that you had thousands of people who were also had convictions for paraphernalia, not even for consumption, not even for possession, but literally for para. For things like having a bong or having whatever, and they had convictions on their record as well. And so actually one of the things I love about this team, it is this there's an old Jay-Z line which says, go harder, go further, go farther. Is that not what we came? And if not, then why bother? right?
Right.
And I
Absolutely.
love that's the mentality that this team very much has. Is that not why we came? And if not, then why bother?
Mhm.
And so I'm really thankful for the fact that we were able to push a needle on this, and we got to, and we didn't just get to a conclusion that led the whole nation. Again, no state in the country has done something so seismic when it comes to a mass pardon. But also the thing is, we know is we still have more to do to be able to address a lot of the wrongs when it comes to how we've applied this in the criminal justice system.
So what can some of the returning citizens look forward to?
Yeah.
Outside of the pardon's a big step. They can get jobs. They can get certain licenses and things like that. Do
Yeah.
you think they'll be able to play in the game too if they wanted to continue in the cannabis industry?
100%. And that was one of that was actually one of the big motivations behind it, is that now people, all they literally have to do, I mean, you can go and just check, because in addition to the pardons, there's tens of thousands of people who essentially now just have their record expunged.
Right.
There's nothing on your record anymore. And then for even the people who are involved inside this process, you can now go and participate in the cannabis market. You can go, and whether you're talking about licenses, whether you're talking about being involved in para, whether you're being involved as a grower, whether you're being involved in a whole bunch of things, you now have access to new opportunities that you oftentimes were still held back and collectively could not be involved in. And so when we were saying, like, if we were going to be about the people, let's really make sure we're opening up opportunities for the people. And having people where, a decision that was made in the 1980s or the 1970s, or a decision that was made, frankly, 5 years ago, when the conditions were totally different, how do we then come up with a new perspective in the way we can address it and open up new opportunities, particularly economic opportunities, for people to be able to make their way?
And in preparation for this conversation, I wanted to ask you that because I was reading a story about what happened in Chicago, and
Mm.
they prioritized people of color being able to get these licenses, but
Right.
then when they were given out, you saw like the same like rich white businessmen snatching them all up, and I think for a whole lot of people watching this, they want to know. How can they aggressively attack this industry with the hopes of making money and being
Right.
able to play and I don't you talk to I'm not one of those like I'm not a weed expert, right? Talking to a weed expert could really if you plan on having a 3-minute conversation, they start talking about buds and colors and indicas and
Oh, there's a whole
sativas and
science to it.
you know
There's a whole
and
science.
and I'm like, I'm just trying to get to my card. So there's people who actually really, really, really love this industry, and they want first crack at being able to play. So it's like, how do we even avoid the powers, under you from being able to make sure there's a rainbow collection of people able to get the licenses?
I love that, and I love that you just framed it that way, because it's right. I mean, I think for a lot of people, because in our state we actually had a medicinal license
Hmm.
that took place for a while, and then it was just until 2022 that we opened it up to now being a recreational market. And so people would say, well, the people with them on the medicinal side have an automatic head start, and in many cases the argument is they did, right, because they were involved inside the industry beforehand. But we've been remarkably intentional and deliberate about making sure that we can open up this market to new people entering in, that it wasn't just about the people on the medical side who can go in and then eat all the licenses on the recreational side, because in many ways what you would actually do is actually exacerbate that gap if you did not have those stop gaps in place.
Hmm.
And so we have actually been there and said, all right, we've actually installed people inside of our the cannabis commission to say our sole focus is to bring in people who've been directly impacted. Our sole focus is to bring on people who have not been involved in this industry before. Our sole focus is to make sure they're bringing in social equity licensees and bringing in the most impacted communities, making sure that they have an outsized influence and involvement inside of our cannabis market. And so we really are taking a sense of pride in the way that we're walking people through this process. We're walking people through and helping them to understand that this new industry that the state voted, and by the way, the state voted by 70%
Wow.
to have a recreational cannabis market. I laugh because when I ran for governor, I got more individual votes than anyone who'd ever run for governor in the history of the state of Maryland. We've got like 61% of the vote. The only thing that beat me that year was cannabis. Cannabis got 70. So you have 70% of the state said we're ready for a recreational cannabis market. But we had to make sure it was done right. We had to make sure it was done equitably. We had to make sure it was done safely. And we had to make sure that people who might have historically not been involved inside the industry got a chance to be able to actually have a measure of participation. And I'm really proud of the fact that I think Maryland has had the most successful rollout of any state in the country.
What has Maryland learned from other states like Colorado who has been on this journey? Have you guys picked up anything or saw anything that you should do or you shouldn't do?
Yeah, and honestly, and big up to a lot of the states who have done it before us. I mean, Maryland, there are now 38 states in the country that either have a recreational market or a legalized market for cannabis. And so Maryland was not the first to be able to do it. But we just made sure that we wanted the focus to be, while Maryland wasn't the first, I wanted Maryland to be the best. I wanted Maryland to take the lessons learned for how certain states did it well, about how certain states did not do it as well, and what would they have done differently had they had that time to be able to really think through this in the right process. And so that's why, for example, having an Office of Social Equity, that was something that we put on board because other states did not. And other states were, and I was speaking with other governors, and they were saying, you know what, in retrospect, I would have actually done that. I would have put a better focus on that. That we had real focus on areas of how much of a transition going from the medical market to the recreational market. Because there's some states who are like, we didn't do that right. And we actually did not open up enough of the recreational market because the medical market basically came up and cannibalized everything. So we were very intentional about how are you thinking about that. So we actually took a lot of lessons learned from these other states about the things they did well, about the things they did not do well, and making sure that Maryland really could be what I believe and what many people believe has been the best practice for any state about how this works. And now we have other states that are contacting us and saying, can we learn about how y'all did it because we think y'all did it right.
Earlier you mentioned how at one point marijuana and heroin were scheduled the same, right? And we
Yep.
understand how big of a mistake that was historically, and what it's done to the community and broken apart families, and it's just
That's right.
So my question is, how do you think this is going to change the conversation around other narcotics?
Yeah.
Like, how do we change the conversation? You were one of the first governors to talk about drugs being a mental health, being a health issue, and not people who go through these systems are not social pariah, right? They need help. They need help, right? So how do we change the conversation around that, or is there some sort of plan in place to change how we treat people who suffer from addiction
Yeah.
as a disease, not as something that people just do just to do?
I tell you, D, and I know for you it's personal too, and for me it's personal. I mean, we've lost people
Absolutely.
to this illness, and that it's important for people to know, like, that's exactly what this is. This is an illness. I mean, I'm thinking about my guy, David, who we lost a few years back, and he battled addiction. He battled addiction for a long time, and we tried so many different things to be able to try to support him through his journey. And I remember literally to the point that we actually tried to get him in a rehab facility out of state, and he wasn't allowed to leave state because he had, check this out, a misdemeanor cannabis conviction.
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't get him treatment for the fact that he was dealing with heroin because he couldn't leave the state to go to the facility that we all thought was a good idea because of a misdemeanor cannabis conviction. And I'll never forget, I heard from his mom, and she asked me, had I seen him? And I told her no. And, as soon as I got that note, I knew what was going on. And then the next message I got from her was that they found him in a vacant. Like, this is personal for us. And, the thing that really led us to this journey on cannabis is the data is very clear. the data is very clear about what cannabis is, the impacts on cannabis, how many people actually use it for medicinal reasons and all that kind of stuff. And so cannabis was was an important and frankly for me a pretty easy one for us to say we got to lead on this, guys. This doesn't make sense. I also know that this larger war on drugs that has taken place, the damage that it has done to communities, the damage that the drugs have done to communities, and the fact that we have essentially decided the only way we deal with it is criminalization without understanding that this is an illness that people are battling. Like I think about David. I mean, in one of the last conversations I had with him, where all he was simply saying was, he's like, I just don't want to disappoint y'all. Like, he was trying. He fought. This was an illness he was dealing with. The same as we watch people who are dealing with cancer, or the same way we're watching people deal with other illnesses. This is an illness, and people are fighting. And we as a society have just got to figure out how to be more thoughtful. We've got to be more compassionate. We've got to understand that you are not going to criminalize your way into a solution on this. That we have to have, that we have to have ways of making sure that communities are safe and all that. I get all of that. And trust me, if you look at the work of our administration, we're proud of the fact that Maryland now has had the steepest drop of homicides and violent crimes of any state in the country. Like, we're proud of the work that's happening on that. I also know this, though, that we cannot think that we are going to just militarize our way out to things that are larger societal problems. You got to solve it at its root. You got to solve these things at the problem where it shows itself. And when we're talking about things like addiction and the battle that individuals, and frankly, the battle that families are dealing with this addiction, because it's not just the individual, it's the whole family, it's the whole ecosystem that is wrestling with it and dealing with it. We as a society really have to do a better job of living compassionately and understanding that our job is to help take care of each other and all this.
And let's talk to the people who aren't compassionate, right? Even if you're not compassionate, it costs more to jail somebody than it comes to actually treat the issue. And it's not even just a toll it plays on society, and what happens in that individual family who has a loved one that's incarcerated, but we're actually paying for bids and meals and foods inside of jails, right? So can you speak to the economic side of it? Because it seems like it works both ways.
Exactly. The healthcare, the food, listen, I can't tell, for people, you have to understand the amount of state budget that we have that is going towards the criminal justice system is staggering, right? And you know what I would love? I would love for us to actually have a sense of rehabilitation and reentry so that we can get more people inside of the workforce. We can get more people to be taxpayers. We can get more people to buy homes. We can get more people to be able to focus on how are they taking care of their future generations, right? And then if we can do that, then we can also, when we talk about things like the criminal justice system, and we are talking about people, the ones who are like pushing this into neighborhoods and pushing this into communities and putting violence in our communities, we have to make sure and let them know, like, listen, there is no patience and there is no place for y'all to hide. But the way that works is if we can actually say, but for the people who we know are actually suffering and dealing with this as the illness that it is, how can we be more compassionate? Because those are the folks, I'm like, listen, if we can bring them back on board, D, that's the thing. I'm like, I want to get them back into a workforce. I want to get them to a job training programs and apprenticeship programs. I want to get them back into community colleges and four-year colleges. I want to make sure that they are then there for their family members, because also you want to talk about something that data shows. Data shows if you have parents and guardians who are involved in children's lives, that child has a better chance of success. I want that. And I want everybody in our state to be able to have that kind of opportunity. But it also means that we have to be able to strike that line of, yes, at some point, second chances become last chances. And at the same time, though, let's start offering people first chances in the first place. Because for a lot of people, they don't even have that. And so I think when we hit that balance as a state, when we hit that balance as a society, as a community, then I think we're really doing what we need to do, and we're honoring the promise that I think the community sets out for all of us.
since you bring up bringing people back to work, I gotta let this one go. Um, we're trying to bring a TV show to Baltimore, and the show was actually is based in the Bronx, right?
Uh-huh.
The show's based on the Bronx, so they had. I don't know if you had a chance to meet Nina Noble, but she was like showrunner on The Wire,
I not.
and one of the showrunners with David Simon. When we did We Own the City with George Pelicanos, and they ran the numbers for Baltimore and they ran the numbers for shooting in New York, and it was like almost the same price. So we got to get those tax credits in Maryland because over the pandemic, when we did We Own the City, we hired over 5,000 people
That's right.
from Baltimore and surrounding counties, many of which weren't working during the pandemic, and they got a chance to work in film. They got a chance, like some of them people joined the union and they were on their second and third show within a year actually making money doing something that they love. So we gotta start that conversation about bringing those tax credits back because it's gonna create so many jobs, and it's gonna create a new industry in the
That's
city where we can pull students from high school, help them be grips, help them do lighting, help them get in front of the camera, behind the camera, and actually work. So another time, another conversation, but we definitely we got to talk about that at some point.
Well, let me tell you something. I'm excited to talk about that. And listen, and I know, speaking of getting back to work, I know you got to get back, as we got to cut it short. However, I do want to say this thing on the tax credit. So in our first year, we actually introduced legislation and passed legislation to be able to double the tax credits
Absolutely.
that come on
Let's
board
do
for the
it.
state of Maryland to be able to attract more industry to come on board. We actually started off. We started something, the Maryland Film Council, that is actually has a sole focus on bringing industry, film industry, and creative content, culture creators, bringing them to Maryland and bringing them to Baltimore. I'm a big believer that no matter what production that you have, whether you need city, whether you need farmland, whether you need mountains, whether you need beaches, no matter what you need, Maryland has got it. And Maryland is the best place to be able to do it. And I think there's a real focus area of it. And I'll tell you one quick thing. Take a look at Atlanta, right? Atlanta and Georgia specifically said we are going to invest inside this industry. And now what has happened? Georgia is now literally rivaling California. Atlanta is rivaling Hollywood for production of new films and new content. All the Marvel movies are now being done in Georgia.
We can beat them
And
all.
we can beat them all. We can beat them all. So I'm not only am I with you, I'm excited to work with you on that one as well, D.
Let's do it.
Let's
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the great work you've been doing. And
okay.
shout out to the people who got part. You get back to work and make it happen.
Get back to work and let's make it happen. Hey, God bless you. And listen, D, keep leading. Keep leading. We're all following you, man.
Likewise.
God bless
Peace.
you and the family.
God bless.
Thanks,
You
son.
too. Peace.